There, welcome to People, Politics and Power. I am Imonia Marere. Nigeria's President Ahmed Bola Tinubu was in Paris, France, recently on a state visit. Both Presidents Tinubu and Emmanuel Macron described the meeting as an opportunity to deepen the relations between the two countries. The three-day state visit was at the invitation of Macron and it saw the two nations sign bilateral agreements across several sectors, industries, including, of course, solid minerals, banking and finance, energy, infrastructure, agriculture, education, and indeed cultural relations. They announced a €300 million investment plan to support healthcare, transportation, renewable energy, and human capital development, amongst others, which were signed by Nigeria's Finance Minister, Wale Edun, and the French Economy Minister, Antoine Amano. The private sector was not left out, as two of Nigeria's banking giants signed agreements with the French authorities to commence operations in Paris. As the administration touts this venture as a win for its foreign investment drive, Nigerians are divided on the import of the latest raft of French-Nigeria agreements. Despite Nigeria being France's top trading partner in sub-Saharan Africa, this is the first official visit by a Nigerian leader to Paris in more than 2 decades. However, President Macron visited Nigeria in 2018, and on that occasion, he met with former President Muhammadu Buhari and also members of the private sector. Some analysts point to the strained relationship between France and its historic partners in the West African sub-region. They accuse the French of looking for new friends in the region after falling out with some of its former colonies, such as Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, following a series of military coups that toppled governments that were seen to be loyal to Paris. Others say Nigeria's relationship with France doesn't have to be defined by those of its neighbors. The conversation today is focused on defining the relationship between the two nations going forward, using history as our guide. Should Nigeria enter into a deeper alliance with France, given its long history in the region that includes military and economic interventions and what some may describe as exploitation, which they say held hostage and impoverish those nations? Or should Nigeria align itself as a big brother to its neighbors who are fleeing Paris's control and, of course, strangulation? They ask, why is it the banking and extractive industry sectors and not the tech and manufacturing sectors, which will benefit a larger chunk of the Nigerian populace with significant investments? Well, joining the conversation to answer these questions and a myriad of other issues to be discussed are two gentlemen, two professors, two experts in the field. First, joining me in the studio here is Professor Jibrin Ibrahim, who is a senior fellow of the Center for Democracy and Development, CDD, and a political scientist. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
We are joined virtually by Professor Bola Akitenwa. Professor Akitenwa is a former Director General of the Nigerian Institute for International Affairs, and he is currently a Professor of International Affairs at the Achievers University in Owo, Ondo State. Prof, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. It's a pleasure being with you.
Welcome. Right, so we'll go on a short break, and when we return, we delve straight into our discussion.
Nigeria, and we are getting closer and closer. We are doing better now in the area of security. I can assure all the investors here that Nigeria is open for business. We cannot but invest in one another's economy.
These economic partnerships which should make France a long-term partner to accompany you for the food security of your nation, and also to allow the extraction and the valorization of minerals to be a partner of your defense and security strategy with our industries. These are three axes that we are committed to. France will continue to invest through the 8FD. We have more than 320 million euros from 2025 for food security projects.
The Nigeria of our dream, the Nigeria we need, is the united, indissoluble, and cohesive Nigeria which guarantees equity, fairness, justice, and prosperity for its citizens. That is our focus on people, politics, and power. It is fresh, insightful, impactful. It's a must-watch. People, politics, and power on AIT.
Thank you so much for staying with us. Those were sound bites from the meetings in Paris between President Bola Ahmed Tinubu and Emmanuel Macron of France. Now, let's begin this way, Professor Akitenwa. Let me begin with an issue that is closely related to what we're discussing today. You recall the president has been on a diplomatic shuttle to several countries of late, from Brazil to France and then to South Africa. Before then, he was also in China at the time and all of that. And you will also recall that in September 2023, the president recalled all Nigerian envoys from their postings. And so the embassies or the high commissions are manned, as it were, by charging their affairs in these countries. And many argue that as much as the president's diplomatic drives may be yielding fruits, there won't be a robust on-the-ground follow-ups without having diplomats, ambassadors in place in these many countries. It's about 15 months now since those envoys were recalled and no replacement. How much is that impacting on the president's efforts at drawing attention in terms of investment to Nigeria?
Thank you for this type of question. But kindly permit me to greet my brother and colleague, Gibrin, and welcome him to the club of the septuagenarians in diplomacy, in everything. I'm happy that he's there for the two of us to discuss this issue of France. Now, as to your question, you know, the workings in any diplomatic missions are quite different from the workings in the public service. They don't operate on the same premise. Every embassy, every diplomatic mission has what we call mission charter, what each embassy is supposed to be targeting, and which in any case is very consistent with Professor Gambari's foreign policy concentric circles, and what Ambassador Oluyemi Adeniji eventually redefined as constructive and beneficial concentricism. That is to say that while Professor Gambari is saying that we need to operationalize the areas of our foreign policy interests, to give priority to some areas, Oluyemi Adeniji is saying, what are we really pursuing in each concentric circle? So when, for instance, our president, Bola Ahmed Tinubu, now travels on a state visit to France. And we are now looking at how the agreements done will be implemented. I am going to say simply that, look, there is a process. The only, issue, the only problem, the only impediment is simply that there is the protocolar aspect in whatever anyone is doing. Like they say, water will always find its own level. Diplomats find their own levels in diplomacy. If you are a third secretary, you cannot easily go and be interacting with councillors. You are a third secretary, you mingle with third secretaries. You are a councillor, you operate at the level of a councillor. You are a minister councillor, you operate, at the level of minister councillors. When you are now an ambassador, regardless of the type or the name, high commissioner, high representative, ambassadors, papa nuncios, all these people will meet at their level. So if for whatever reason an agreement is done today, the chargé d'affaires cannot go to the level of a principal representative of an extraordinary and plenipotentiary ambassador. You cannot do so because you are junior. But this is quite different from a diplomatic mission where, for instance, the head, the accredited head, has a chargé d'affaires title. You can have a chargé d'affaires. We can also have chargé d'affaires ad interim. So if the highest ranking officer is chargé d'affaires, there wouldn't be any problem. The only thing is simply that the execution, contacting your counterparts in the host country, that's where the problem can exist. But it cannot actually prevent the execution. All these agreements, these accords, fall within executive agreements generally. And it is at the home level that the issue can apply. You know quite well that, on the basis of international law in this case, Nigeria is a dualist country. It's not a monist country. Dualist in the sense that any agreement done internationally has, after ratification by the executive government, must be domesticated before it can enter into force. So the implementation of this type of agreements may or may not dovetail to the level of going to the National Assembly. So in answering your question precisely, there are two levels of looking at that. Will the National Assembly be required to ratify the agreement? What is the level of this agreement itself? Is it not memorandum of understanding we are talking about? It's not, strictly speaking, a treaty. It's not a convention. It's a bilateral agreement done like any other. So I wouldn't see any big deal so far. The only thing that people do not easily understand about Nigeria's relationship with France is simply that France has always dichotomized, its relationship with Nigeria. France distinguishes between its political and economic relationships. France does not allow any misunderstanding when it comes to protection of economic interests, but can disagree with you politically. Even during the Civil War, when France was backing Biafran secession from Nigeria, economic ties were moving on steadily. So to date, all these agreements are most likely to be given special attention. But that does not mean that the other problems will not inhibit that. Let me stop there, meanwhile, and have you.
Yes, I'll bring in Professor Jibrin right, at this point in time, and I'm going to also pose the same question, but rephrase slightly. How the absence of diplomats in these missions abroad is affecting Nigeria's foreign policy objectives. including, of course, all the agreements that have been entered into in the past couple of months?
Thank you. Bola, thanks for your kind words. On the question of the absence of ambassadors, I think Bola has been very clear and comprehensive in his response, which is that essentially when a president goes to a country and they have an MOU that they agree to, the follow-up can be done effectively only by an ambassador. And that the context we are facing, which is the same thing we faced under Buhari, who didn't send the ambassadors for a very long time, is that you go to a country, you discuss, you reach an agreement, but there's no follow-up for a very long time. I think the advice therein is very clear, that it is urgent for the president to appoint ambassadors so that they can follow through on his various foreign policy trips, where he is trying to pursue a path for economic recovery for our country, and that he shouldn't spend so much energy for something that will not move forward quickly. So I will just stop there.
Okay, so let's come down to the specific visit, the visit by Tinubu to France and the agreements. Many things have been said about what transpired in France. Many things have also been said about the invitation in the first place, flowing from, of course, the experience of the French in the last 1 year in the West African sub-region. Is this an attempt to cut new friends in the sub-region? You recall that we were here some time ago to discuss issue about the French trying to establish military bases in some West African countries, including Nigeria, following their being booted out of their colonial allies like Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. This visit, this invitation and visit by President Tinubu, is it intended to spite these 3 other countries and to cut new friends in the sub-region?
I think the context is very clear. France and Nigeria have always had this dual type of relationship, as Professor Akinteriwa has explained, where economic relations have been very good over a very long time, but political relations have been more strained. And the reason why we've had strain is that while Nigeria considers itself to be an African power, France considers itself to be a power in Africa, and that therefore there is some sort of a natural competition between the two in political terms. But I think the specific context of the moment is extremely important. I understand it was the French government that invited President Tinubu to go and pay a state visit. And France had had a lot of difficulties in its former African colonies over the recent years. The break of relations with Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger have been quite devastating for France, which has always wanted a very firm presence in the Sahel. So basically, it's being pushed out of the Sahel. But there are also other things that have cropped up. One of France's most reliable ally in Africa is Chad. And Chad has just informed France that their military bases, they should pack up and leave the country immediately, that it doesn't want French military presence in their country. This is a huge blow to France, and France is now finding itself, its army has been pushed out of Mali, it's been pushed out of Burkina Faso, pushed out of Niger, and now they are being pushed out of Chad. As if that's not enough trouble for France, Senegal has just announced it will also push out French military presence. So it's a conjuncture that's very difficult for France. France wants to keep its military in Africa, and therefore it's a moment in which it needs new political friends it can rely on. And that's where the complication comes in, because as you recall, following the coups in the Sahelian countries, both Nigeria and France took the political position that the military must leave power and that the former democratically elected governments must come back. So for a long time, France and Nigeria have not had the same political position. And this time, their interests coincide in what has happened in these three countries. So I think for France, they feel this is an opportunity to carry forward this cooperation, to create new friends, and maybe for them, new bases. But then the real question is, how far can Nigeria go in that regard? Because Nigeria has to be careful, because both its Sahelian neighbors are very concerned about this relationship with France. And they have been saying that France wants to move its military to Nigeria and Ghana so that we could join France to attack them. So there's that concern in these three countries. I don't know what the reality is, but I've had their comments about these issues. So Nigeria too has to be careful in terms of its own relationship with its neighbors. We have 1,500-kilometer frontier with Niger Republic, and there has been fraternal relationship for a very long time. And this type of problem could create difficulties in terms of relationship between the two countries.
All right. While we wait to have Prof rejoin us, because I understand there is a little... Okay. Prof, are you with us now?
Yes, I've rejoined.
Okay, right. Thank you so much. And I'm going to take off from where Prof stopped here, and that's talking about the strategic interest of the French in the West African sub-region. If Chad is following in the footsteps of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, and asking the French out, particularly the French army, that will leave only a few other Francophone countries still very much close to the French. That will leave Gabon, for instance, Guinea, Ivory Coast, Benin, and Togo. Those will be the only ones left. So should Nigeria be concerned about the kind of perception from the Sahel region?
Very interesting question. Professor Gibrin made one important point that partly explains or answers the question you have raised. You see, it is the issue of the attitudinal disposition of many of these Francophone countries towards France. Should we be concerned as Nigeria, as Nigerians? Yes and no. Yes, because Tinubu's visit to France falls within the framework of what I call international life. That is, personal relationship, sentimental relationships between Emmanuel Macron and Bola Ahmed Tinubu. And this should not be confused with Nigeria-France relationship. They are two different things. The agreement, the MOUs that are taking place were most influenced by the personal sentiments between the two leaders. At the level of sovereign state to another sovereign state, it is completely a different kettle of fish. In this case, France, when France was declared a persona non grata, first of all in Mali, then in Burkina Faso, before it came to the turn of Niger, one, public official reported in either Libération or Le Figaro in France, made it clear that France will come back. But the manner of coming back was not well articulated. We don't know. People insinuated that it's going to be by force. But it came to pass that invasion will not be possible. Now meaning that France must find another alternative, possibly by way of manu militari. So in this case, if it's going to be manu militari, Nigeria should be concerned about the implications. There was some reported, information, the extent to which France might have influenced Alassane Ouattara of Côte d'Ivoire in ensuring the election of our president as chair, as primus inter pares of the ECOWAS authority. So in this case, this gave the Francophone protesting junta the right or the wrong perception that Bola Ahmed Tinubu of Nigeria is a puppet of France. And the way they are looking at Nigeria regards or requires being concerned. So that, Niger is the friendliest neighbor of Nigeria. Niger Republic is the only country with which there is no border dispute, land dispute. All other countries, Chad, Cameroon, Benin Republic, especially in the Ilo district, we have border disputes, but we don't have anything with Niger. As a result of the Nigeria-Niger Commission established as early as 1971, that, commission has prevented all these misunderstandings. Now what is happening is that the friendliest country, the immediate neighbors, are quarreling with Nigeria. As a result of the foreign policy position of Nigeria on this matter, for instance, it was very difficult to differentiate between ECOWAS policy and Nigeria's policy when a 7-day ultimatum was given to Abdurrahman Tiani, the leader of the junta in Niamey. We couldn't differentiate. Now, Nigeria that had an agreement based on the principle of pacta sunt servanda, that is sanctity of agreement. Nigeria breached the agreement. We are supplying electricity to the people of Niamey, but either reportedly in compliance with the directive of the ECOWAS or willfully at the level of Nigeria, we breached the agreement. Nigerians are not happy with us. So the implication for this question of yours, that should we be concerned, I cannot imagine how Nigeria will want to befriend France to the detriment of Nigeria's relationship with the immediate neighbors. I come back to Professor Gambari's argument. The innermost circle of the foreign policy concentric circles is that the national security of Nigeria is intertwined with the security of the immediate neighbors, meaning that if there is crisis, if there is conflict, if there is insecurity in any of the neighboring countries, it directly affects us. So the immediate neighbors and Nigeria are put in the innermost circle, according to Agbola Gambari. And in this particular case, when you are now hobnobbing with France to now fight directly or indirectly your immediate neighbors, that means you are raising questions about your national security at the innermost circle. We should be concerned. But if I argue that, look, we shouldn't be concerned, people will say, well, national interest comes first. But if the protection of your national interest will be detrimental to your regional interest in security, how do you go about that? So it's a very complex issue. And the most critical aspect of it, thank you, my brother, for raising it earlier on. There are speculations, there are reports that there is an agenda of establishing in northern Nigeria either a Franco-American or French or American military base in northern part of Nigeria. This is the critical question. Nigeria's foreign policy, first of all, is against establishment of any foreign military base in any part of Africa. Okoye, when he was Commissioner for External Affairs under General Yakubu Gowon, Nigeria had a policy stating clearly that African resources will not be allowed to be used for the development of Europe to the detriment of African countries. And under no circumstance will we accept foreign military base. In 2005, the United States wanted to transfer the headquarters of the AFRICOM from Stuttgart in Germany to Nigeria. We kicked against it. Nigeria had been complaining against French military bases in Africa. And France had always given the argument that, look, Nigeria is complaining, but sovereign states like Nigeria authorized, invited France to come. So Nigeria had always been in disagreement with the Francophone brothers. So the situation now goes beyond any MOU. It goes beyond even the military base. The issue now is, can Nigeria afford the luxury of directly or indirectly partnering with France to come and fight Africans on their soil? African Union, ECOWAS are at fault when they talk about unconstitutional change of government. When a coup is by military for the purposes of changing government, of course, we must differentiate between that type of coup from when that same coup is supported by the people. The people initiated was supportive of the coup in Mali. The June 5 movement in Mali, were on the streets. By the time it was degenerating, that brought in, the Koita regime. The same is true in Niger Republic. The people who are against, they are fed up. They say they don't want France anymore. And like you rightly pointed out, and corroborated also by Professor Gibrin, Chad, just last week, Sahel, Senegal 3-4 days ago, John indicated, Senegal is saying, oh, you French people, you killed our people sometime, they are doing 40th anniversary or whatever. Chad now said they now want to exercise their full sovereignty. So the question that Nigerians should answer should begin from the fact that why is it now that people are tired of France? So the Yoruba people say, Ari ìyàwó kò yá ńlé. That is, you now have a new wife, a younger wife. You now reject the old wife that had given you children, etc. all along. What is responsible? So let me stop there by telling you, reminding you that the Yoruba proverbial saying says, what is behind 6 is more than 7. So the problem is more complex. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. You have thrown so much on the table for us to chew here. So should Nigeria be more concerned about its security in the sub-region by, for instance, continue to play the big brother role with its neighbors and ensuring that it enjoys a good relationship with its neighbors? Or should it go the route it is going right now by, as it were, aligning with the French when it is almost entirely surrounded by former French colonies in the sub-region? Was it deliberate, for instance, that the agreements that were signed in France were almost all entirely economic agreements in different sectors of the economy, agriculture, energy, education, and what have you? Was it deliberate that there was little or no mention of any political issues in the discussions between the two presidents?
Yeah, I'm glad you noted that silence, and that silence might be deliberate. You recall that when Nigeria, with ECOWAS, decided on military intervention to return President Bazoum to power in Niger, we in civil society came out and opposed it. But I think more important, the National Assembly passed a resolution opposing it. And there's a very strong opposition in Nigeria to starting a new conflict with our closest neighbor, Niger. I think everybody I've had comment on it has said that will be a total disaster and a real threat to our security as Nigeria. But I want to also emphasize the point Professor Akinteriwa made about foreign military bases and the position of Nigeria. In 1962, Nigeria wanted to sign the Anglo-Nigeria Defense Pact with the United Kingdom. And students at the University of Ibadan came out and protested massively against it. And wider Nigerian opinion supported that. And the Tafawa Balewa regime was forced by the opposition to cancel the Anglo-Nigerian Defense Pact. Also in 2000-2001, President Olusegun Obasanjo wanted to sign with the Americans a military pact. Nigerians came out openly and opposed it. But I think it was also interesting that the chief of army staff at that time, General Malu, came out openly, confronted President Obasanjo, and said the Nigerian military will not accept foreign military bases in this country. If, therefore, there is discussion between Nigeria and France, as you've noted, there was silence on this matter. But if they are considering it, you can be sure that the Nigerian people and the Nigerian military itself will be completely opposed to it. And Professor Akinteriwa has drawn our attention to when the Americans wanted to transfer the headquarters of their Africa Command to Nigeria, and that was resisted. So part of the concern I think we all have is that we suspect there were political discussions, but there are no reports on anything political that has happened. In that case, we have to wait and see what happens. But even on the economic agreements Nigeria is having, we shouldn't forget that France itself is in deep political crisis. Just last night, the French Parliament passed a motion of censure against the Prime Minister, and therefore he has been thrown out of office. The French Parliament is divided into three blocks: the extreme left, the center, and the extreme right. And each one of them has about 1/3 of the votes in Parliament. And none of them can ally with the other. So France has just entered a period of political volatility and instability itself. And agreements reached by the French president would have great difficulties for implementation when they do not themselves have a stable government. And this is the first time a big power like that will find itself in a position of political instability itself. Last night, a lot of the political parties were calling on Macron to resign from office, that he's been a political disaster, and that he must leave office. And when he addressed the nation yesterday night, he said he's not going to resign, but the pressure is mounting on him. So I think the political reality in France today should be part of the equation. What is the value of your agreements with France when France itself cannot constitute its own government to implement? So we've raised the issue that on Nigeria's part, we don't even have ambassadors in those countries to follow up. But France itself today has no government to follow up on any agreement.
Given the crisis of governance and the instability that appears to be playing out in France and even back home in Nigeria, those agreements, are they worth more than the papers on which they were signed?
Well, I think it's difficult to say what the value of these agreements are. On the Nigerian side, don't forget there is a lot of concern among the Nigerian people about the cost of living crisis we are all in. Even members of the elite like us now, we have to think twice before driving all the way from my house to AIT. I was thinking of the petrol I will be consuming. So it's a very difficult time for this country. But the economic situation in France is also quite dicey at this time. It was really about the budget that their own government fell. So even the money they are saying they will keep aside for investment in Nigeria, the French government budget has been rejected by the National Assembly. So I think we are living in interesting times when there's a lot of instability, there's a lot of unknown factors, and there isn't a lot of clarity in terms of the coverage of all the discussions that took place.
Prof, let's bring you in very quickly. Against the backdrop of the fact that the French have a lot of investments in Nigeria. In fact, at the last count, over 100 French companies operate in various economic sectors in Nigeria, including, of course, pharmaceuticals, energy, insurance, agriculture, shipping, and the hospitality sector. Given that scenario, do you really think that Nigeria had a choice about having to proceed with this deeper relationship with the French?
As I told you earlier on, the relationship between Nigeria and France is based on a conscious policy of dichotomy. As much as Professor Gibrin had rightly pointed out, the political disagreement in France does not appear to me to have any potential to disrupt the protection of French economic interests in Nigeria. It's a clear-cut policy. They can disagree, they can disintegrate into anything at the political level. But when it comes to exploitation of foreign resources, when it comes to protection, you know, they have these coffers that will normally guarantee, support, you know, French business activities worldwide. That is their concern. These politicians will not bring their internal disagreement to the level of foreign economic interest. That has always been the pattern. You are talking about more than 100 French companies. There was the time the French had about 212 companies, businesses in Nigeria, starting from the time they have Safran, which changed to ELF, then later on to Total. From the 60s, they have always been consolidating. During the time Yakubu Gowon told Nigerians that Nigeria's problem was not money, but how to spend that. Please, that was the period the French even told Nigeria to accept to help us have a nuclear energy plant. Nuclear. But we told France that we were not interested. So economic interest is a major, a critical issue in the relationship. Now, should we continue to deepen our cooperation there? Why not? We should, because in this case, it is the economic interest which Bola Ahmed Tinubu, through his foreign minister, Tuga, they came up with the policy of 4Ds, all right, to drive foreign policy behavior. And they are emphasizing, you know, economic investments. So I think we should capitalize on the 4Ds in relating with France. More significantly, you know, the only way Nigeria can take a good advantage of economic ties with France is to introduce what Ojoma Duque has called citizen diplomacy. Now, for instance, experts, professional students, professionals in different ramifications should be able to link up with their counterparts in France. They should not be discussing this issue one-on-one. So if you bring the citizens, the people, into governance, into the conduct and management of a relationship with France, it will be easier, and they will be able to remove the mutual suspicions that have characterized the relationship since 1960 to date. If it's going to be government to government, I can tell you that most, if not all, the public officials in Nigeria hold, you know, they have reservations in our relationship with France. France is not on record, especially when it comes to state, government to government. It's not on record to have supported us. My brother Gibrin told us, reminded us about the hostility of France in different initiatives. There are many. But in this case, even if we disagree at one level, there are cases when you now have to stomach the disagreement to move forward in other sectors. So let's give it a trial. But the trial must never, I repeat, must never be detrimental to the development of cordiality in our relationship with the immediate neighbors. The neighbors are our territorial, our contiguous neighbors. France remains a neighbor of Nigeria by the principle of propinquity. Yeah, that is, we have shared values in international relations. So Nigeria's President Bola Ahmed Tinubu must not allow his personal relationship with Emmanuel Macron to override the state-to-state relationship. And also, who knows the future of Emmanuel Macron? Who knows? One government comes in today and they change the policy.
All right, Prof. Thank you so much. Stay with us. But let me ask this last question, and it's going to go to both of you. Macron seems to be singing a new song. He's talking about partnerships of equals with Africa, given the history of the French, of their exploitative relationship with African countries, particularly their former colonies. Can this be taken seriously, this partnership of equals?
Well, you have to look at history. It was in 1958 that General Charles de Gaulle took the decision to have unequal partnerships with his colonies so that France will continue to maintain control over its ex-colonies following independence. That policy was sustained throughout. Now there is an announcement that there will be new partnership based on equality. But the entire French establishment, foreign policy establishment, has been raised and trained in the system that has operated since 1958. So we'll wait and see whether this announcement will be translated into facts. But I think the key point here is that France is very conscious that the type of control it has had in the past, it cannot sustain it anymore. And it's already suffering precisely because of that. So there may be some sincerity in terms of their knowing that they can't continue as before. But then they've enjoyed the old relationship for so long that it's difficult for them to make that transition to a new relationship.
Thank you so much, Prof. What do you have to say to that? Partnership of equals with Africa, is that possible between France and any African country?
It is at best a dream. Partnership cannot be equal. It does not exist. As much as I agreed with Professor Ibrahim going back to 1958, when assimilation, when the Francophones were assimilated as equal French citizens, in practice, that equality never existed. When, for instance, the Francophone countries, their foreign reserves, they were made, to put them in France's central bank. Even your own money, when you want to take a loan, you must get the permission of France. All these conditions are there. Even, let us even go back to 1944, not even 1958, the Brazzaville Declaration. Equality never existed between and amongst the Francophones on the one hand and the French. The French, by the time they were talking about the Francophones, they had Quai d'Orsay, Minister of Foreign Affairs, but they also have what they call Ministry of Cooperation, exclusively reserved for the Francophones. So the inequality is there. To say, look, you do not belong to the general one. You are part of an internal system. And at the end of the day, what is some sovereign equality? Equality of partners. Please, there's a continuum of relationship. It begins with bilateral cooperation. The next thing is partnership. The next level is strategic partnership. The crescendo of it all is called binational commission. So this partnership, what will be the dynamics? What will be the definienda of that particular equality? It doesn't exist.
All right,
you cannot be taking loan from someone. In 1991, La Baule Conference said, we will not give aid unless you democratize. Where does this equality come from? You are waiting, you are the recipient. You are begging France to come and give you this. Where do you have the equality? Where does it come from?
So it doesn't
if you are
exist.
weeping, we must learn to see at the same time.
Thank you so much, Prof. Thank you for your time, and thank you for your contributions. Professor Bola Akinterenwa is former Director General of the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs and currently a Professor of International Relations at Achievers University in Owo, in Ondo State. Thank you so much, Prof, for your time. And
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
right here in the studio, we have Professor Jibril Ibrahim, who is a senior fellow of the Center for Democracy and Development, CDD, a political scientist. Thank you so much, and congratulations on your 70th birthday, which you celebrated just a few days ago.
Thank you very much.
Welcome. And for our viewers out there, thank you so much for joining us. And please join us again when we bring you a fresh edition of People, Politics, and Power. Bye for now.